I had asked the men's group that gave Mr. Larhoven such a big response if they would hoot and holler for me, but apparently that didn't happen. I'll be okay, don't worry. All right, last week we talked about Ask Father Michael. It's going to be kind of the way that we wrap up this 4-week lineup. And we asked people to send in emails, tweet questions, put them on Facebook. We had some really, really good questions. So we have a bunch of questions that we're going to ask. As we are asking them, if you have a question to add to that, raise your hand, and we're going to come find you in the crowd. So I got a mic, Mr. Margaret has a mic. We'll come find you in the crowd. If you have a question to kind of piggyback on what Father Michael's talking about, raise your hand. But we'll go ahead and start off, Ask Father Michael with Father Michael. All right, so, are we on now? Excellent, all right. So, Father, let me walk over here.
Yes.
So we don't
Whoa.
get the hot mic thing.
This is the Lord.
All right, so, Father, we're going to kick it off with this question. This is a great one. A lot of us were talking about this one. The whole head of the family thing for us guys is a struggle. 2 points. One, society promotes equality and equal rights, so men, domineering over women is not accepted. And secondly, my wife doesn't buy it. Yeah, that happened too. Well, I make decisions and it turns into battle. Husbands lording over their wives. How do we address that?
Well, first of all, it's 100% true that we have to acknowledge that domineering is an evil. In the beginning, when God made man and woman, he made them with an equal dignity. He made them with a particular order, and that order did not include domineering. Okay, the idea that to be the head of the household is to domineer, to lord over, to rule over, to crush the heads of all of the subordinates, that's false. Jesus, in his own expression of what love is and service is, he obliterates that whole idea. Okay? What it is to be the head is to be willing to govern and take the responsibility of governing and to take the responsibility to lead. The necessity of having a head, I think we talked about a couple weeks ago, which is to say, if you have two heads and there's a disagreement, you have destruction, right? You have a divided household which cannot stand. And so God appoints one head. The way he did it was he appointed the man to be the head of the household. We won't get into why, because he doesn't actually really explain that. Okay? But one of the things that we can consider an example of how this works without infringing on anyone's equality, okay? Because equality doesn't mean total synonymity, okay? It doesn't mean that I look exactly like, if I'm a husband to a wife, it doesn't mean that I look exactly like her. I would never marry her. It would be awful. It's that we have an equality of dignity within the relationship that we possess with one another, okay? You can see this, though, even more clearly, I think, in the rectory, where the priests live, okay? Not only is there a singularity of gender, that we're all men, we're also all men of very strong will. And we're not only all men of very strong will, we're also equal in our dignity as priests, okay? But there is a single head of this parish. There's a single head of the rectory. 3 very strong-willed men living together. There is a single head. There is order. And it's Father Jack. And it's Father Jack not because he's smarter than Father Augustine. I don't think that's up for debate. Father Augustine is just wicked smart. It's not because he's the most organized person in the world. Anybody who's sent him an email knows this. It's because someone in authority over us has appointed him in authority over Father Augustine and myself. It has nothing to do with qualification. It has to do with the appointment of a proper, competent authority. And that's exactly what the Father, God the Father, does in the human society, so that when there's disagreement, there can be resolution. so that when there is responsibility that must be taken, there is someone to take responsibility. So that when something needs to be pushed forward and there's a discrepancy about which direction it will take, resolution again can be achieved, right? So it's how you lead your family, guys. You lead by love, you lead by sacrifice, and you lead by strength. You cannot give in. You cannot give in when you have decided something as a necessary good for your family just because there's opposition. You can't do it. It is hard. And it is unfamiliar in today's society to have that sense of clarity, to have that sense of authority, to have that sense of order in such a disordered society. But that's like, if you drop enough drops of pure water into brackish water, it will eventually become pure again. Become the beginnings of a purification of our society, beginning with an order in your own household. Does that work?
That sounds good to me. Let's. This one is one that admittedly my wife has talked about, and we've talked about this a lot over there. How do you handle a situation where a spouse may not be as strong in their Catholic faith as the other? This can make leading the family in faith more difficult. And talk about kind of praying together. You know what I mean? If one spouse is very deep and the other one is getting there,
right?
It's kind of praying together.
The purpose of marriage is twofold. The purpose of marriage is for children, the stability of children, to give them everything that they need that is not attainable outside of both a mother and a father, in a stable relationship where they do not need to fear that that will be taken away from them. But it's also for the sake of the couple that are married. You cling to one another. You crawl up one another to heaven. You work with one another in strengthening the weaknesses of the other and exalting or maturing in the other their strengths. So that in working together, you build a tower that ascends to heaven, right? Through your mutual love and friendship with one another. It is the case, however, as it is the case in any relationship, that one person is going to be at one place in their relationship with God and the other person is going to be in another place in their relationship with God. That happens no matter who you meet and where you are and whatever context you're in. What we have to do is we have to exercise two things, I think: love and patience. And I don't mean love in an emotive sense, in an I really kind of like you sense. It's love in an I am going to do whatever in the world I have to make you better. And if that means my own body, my own soul, my own emotions being crushed and ground down into the flour that will be made into the bread, that's what I'll do. I will allow myself to be utterly destroyed for the good of you, right? That's the love that we have to have. And we have to have the patience too, to not only allow ourselves to be crushed, but to not grow weary of that and to grow impatient with the other person and their weaknesses, okay? Those are the things that we have to do in a passive, well, love's not passive, but in a, we'll use, for lack of a better term, in a passive way. In the active way, it comes to encouragement, okay? Now, encouragement is difficult because men and women are encouraged differently. When women try to encourage men, it's called nagging. Don't nag. But expect great things from your husband. And when he falls short of that, let him feel the embarrassment of letting you down. That's how men pick themselves up and move on, because there's a standard. We'll do anything to meet a standard, right? Expect great things from your husband, and let him fall on his face if he needs to. But be there to pick him back up. And ladies, if which is rarer, it's rarer that women are less spiritual than men, but it does happen. And so, gentlemen, if you have a wife that you're really trying to encourage in the faith life, realize that her experience of spirituality is very different from yours. And this is something that we need to talk about. I don't know if it's going to come up in a question. I'm going to hit it just briefly here. Men and women have two very different experiences of spirituality, okay? Women experience spirituality in a very emotive way, oftentimes very sentimental way, in a very, this interior relational, cooey, embracing kind of way, okay? That's wonderful. Men don't get that at all. It's easy for a woman to look at Christ and say, I love you, I want you to be my spouse, I want you to be my lover, I want you to be, can you hear a guy? I mean, that's just awkward. It really is. And so men experience spirituality differently, which leads women to look at their husbands and go, he just doesn't get it. He's not floating on the cloud like I am when I pray. He's out in the wood shop. Guess what? Jesus was out in the wood shop an awful lot, right? The wood shop can be a place, the cave, men's caves are a place where they find, look, we need our caves. Respect the cave, right? It's a place where men can go, and that's where they have that encounter. That's where they have that time to pray. A man's prayer oftentimes looks far more structured, liturgical, rigid, rote, and that does it for us. That's good, right? Whereas women's are far more relational in that human sense of the word. And these things are both good, but they have to be understood, and they have to be respected. I don't know. Although I probably know better than most men because I hear it more from a greater number of women. What a woman's spirituality is like. And ladies, it's really hard for you to understand what a man's spirituality is like. But what you have to trust is that if you love one another and you love the Father, you love God, that will continue to grow. So again, charity, true Christian charity, patience and encouragement from everybody, and you won't build out, you'll build up.
Okay, just to let you know, Kevin, we're going to skip, because I kind of combined 2 and 3. Let's go to number 5.
And I know some of the questions ahead of time, so I'm kind of combining.
No, that's fine, and that's
well.
what we did with 2 and 3, kind of combine those. Now, what if you're single? Because we do have a lot of single folks out here, and you haven't necessarily begun your domestic church. You know, how do you begin that preparation, or how, you know, what are we doing now to prepare for that? Remember
that every way we talk about the church, whether it's the church universal that Patrick talked about, whether it's the church as an institution, as the church as a building, the church as your home. It's made up of the individual building blocks of the living soul, the Christian soul, right? And so if you're sitting out in the quarry and you're not yet built into a structure that becomes the church, Domestica, the church family, we're all part already of the church, which is the living temple of God. But if you're kind of hanging out in the church family quarry, what you're doing at this point is very important. You're allowing the Father, you're allowing the mason, you're allowing the worker to chisel you into the shape that you need to be inserted into that family that God has ordained for you. Okay? Your life now should not be a life of floating, aimless, careless, adolescent frivolity. That's garbage. It's a waste of your life. Because what you're doing now, as a single person, is directing you to something far greater. Something that you will build with other people. And you need to be shaped according to God's providence. God alone knows. You need to be shaped and allowed to be shaped so that you can be fitted into whatever structure God has for you. So live a purposeful life right now. Live a life that is directed towards something greater that you will one day be entered into, inserted into by God's providence.
Thank you, Father. It's just about 10, so let's go ahead and put up the fast announcement. So if you're going to 10:30 Mass, just remember it's 10 o'clock. Please stop eating and drinking and all of that before heading into Mass. Let's go back to number 4. We are married and we have no kids. This domestic church stuff seems all about the kids, passing on the faith, things like that. How does this work for us as a couple that has no kids?
Well, if you take everything I said about the relationship between the husband and the wife, remember, too, that marriage is for two reasons, not just the one. What we want to recognize is that family is directed towards children, but it's directed towards the potentiality of children. Children are not something that we can purchase on demand. That's why things like in vitro fertilization are evil. It makes the child a product that you've ordered. That's not what children are. Children are a gift from God. And we have to receive gifts. We cannot demand or grasp at or take gifts. We must receive gifts. So marriage is, family is an organism that is open to the potentiality of receiving a gift that God in his own providence gives. Okay? So if you're a husband and wife who don't have children, you still have that ecclesia domestica. You still have that domestic church, but it's going to be more focused on getting one another to heaven, becoming saints yourself. But remember, too, there's always the opportunity for you to mentor other children. There's the option for you to adopt children who do not have mothers and fathers, who will be absent those two necessary components to growing into a healthy, a well-ordered man or woman. So there's a lot for you to do. Your resources now, because they're not being put into your own children, should be dispersed more widely across the church universal.
Okay. One more reminder. If you have any questions, raise your hand. About tired of hearing myself talk. I know you're probably tired of hearing me talk. Okay, but if you have a question, raise your hand. Number 6, and this one should get a good response. Okay, I love family retreats, meal prayers, etc., but I have teenagers. Really, I get crossed arms, eyes rolling, annoyances. I want to go to the movies, I want school, homework, etc. How do we make it meaningful for these kids who are confused, discerning, wandering? Teenagers.
Beatings. My mother's here. She had teenagers once. Beatings. She said, yeah, you have to start earlier than that, she said. I still fear the wooden sauce spoon. No, it's true. Here's the thing. The later you begin, and that's a brilliant point. You have to begin sooner, right? Not just the beatings, but the formation. You have to begin it very early. And there is a point where you miss the boat. And sorry, Denny, he's recording. There is a point where you miss the boat. And you know what? You've missed the boat, and at this point, there's really very little that you can do except to weep and to pray, like St. Monica. Okay? It's, again, remember, your own formation as adults, as parents, could have been so badly negatively affected by your own parents, right? That you're really struggling to learn yourself here and now in the present. How do I parent? And you're only just now coming to your own personal conversion where you see it's important for your children to experience this, and now they're 14. Now they're 16. Now they're 18. Okay? In some way, like I've said before, it's not your fault, but it is your problem. So how do we solve this problem with teenagers? If you haven't started forming your children early on, as the Bakers have, as they've mentioned last week, sometimes the best thing that you can do, the only thing that you can do, is to set a good example and to pray. And that's really what it's about. It's not about you getting into your kids' lives and meddling. Okay? If you haven't formed them to be the children, if you're now looking at them and you're saying, you know what, gosh, we should have done a better job, now is not the time to try to start over. Now is the time for you to get yourself in gear, to give them that example that they will one day come back around to, right? I didn't appreciate my parents as teenagers. I began to appreciate them in college. It takes a long time for kids to finally get out of themselves and to realize the great sacrifices that their parents have made for them day in and day out. And when they do finally return to you, not as a kid who's asking for money, but as a young man or a young woman who's looking for that more of a peer-like companionship, they will then be receptive to the formation that you have to offer them by your good example. Living a good, holy Christian life and not meddling. Meddling will just keep them farther away. But give in your own life that example and pray for them. So.
Okay, we got one question. This is probably going to be our last question, Father.
Well, you kind of just answered it, because I was going to ask about adult children who have left the house, that have left the faith, what do you do other than...
Yeah, I did. Yeah. So, it's a tragedy. Look, folks, bad things happen. Okay? And we can, this is a universal statement. I'm not just talking about families here. Bad things happen, but we ourselves cannot do bad things to try to keep bad things from happening. We have to keep ourselves upright and allow in God's providence for bad things to happen, and then try to just keep our eyes open to how he's going to bring good out of it. Do we have time for one more then?
One more. The question is, can you do one in a minute and 15 seconds?
Yes, in a minute and 15 seconds. Let's all
go. We have kids and grandkids out of the nest, or kids and grandkids out of the nest. What is our job now as church leaders of Ecclesia Domestica? We don't want to meddle with our kids' families, but we see where more could be done.
Take all the answers I've given and apply them to that. Don't meddle. Be good examples. And you know what? You have resources now that aren't being poured into your own children. Spread them out.
Excellent. We're good.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Father.